Hey everybody, welcome to some more card reveals. We're now finally up to the class reveals, and these are the ones that interest me the most because it gives you an idea of what the direction of each of the classes is going to be for the coming set. And because we're on a new rotation, it may even give you an idea for the upcoming rotations, even after the next one. I'm so looking forward to it, I cut my hair in honor of it. Anyway, first up was Warrior, and it didn't take a genius to figure out that it was going to be Mech Warrior. They early revealed these two cards, Fireworker and Inventor Boom, both of which rewarded you for having mechs, and in the case of Fireworker, it generated boom bots, right? I also postulated we were going to have some sort of Death Rattle synergy because of Fireworker, and indeed we are. It's Death Rattle mechs is a part of the synergy. Anyway, let's get into the new cards revealed. With a really underwhelming one at first. 2 mana, spell, Quality Assurance. Draw 2 taunt minions. That's the job. And I was like, okay. 2 mana, draw 2. That's okay, right? Just to, skip ahead a little bit. Last Stand has just been in the set. It's about to rotate out. That was 1 mana, draw a taunt minion. It had an upside if you waited till 7 mana. This is kind of like the base effect of Last Stand bundled together. And typically when you bundle cards, they get better, right? Rather than having to use 2 cards, you can use 1 card. Obviously, it was missing the Mana Thirst effect, so it wasn't quite equivalent. Now, there is a Warrior archetype that does use a lot of Taunt minions, and that is Taunt Warrior, Kel Surprise. It isn't a particularly strong deck right now. I don't even know if you would count it as tier 3. It's there or thereabouts. Between there and, they're in the game kicked out into the rough. That's where this deck is. They have a bunch of Taunt minions, obviously, like Unlucky Powderman. Detonation Juggernaut, which, by the way, is also a mech, just as a slight nod to that. And Battle Pickaxe. So there is, this Taunt synergy here, so maybe the Quality Assurance will go into this Taunt Warrior deck. Do I actually think that it's going to happen, though? No. Mainly for the reason that Last Stand doesn't actually make it into Taunt Warrior, because Magtha Bane of Music exists, and what they do instead is they run basically 0 spells, with the exception of Black Rock and Roll normally, and they run 29 other minions. They try and generate these giant taunt guys from Black Rock and Roll and Lothamar, and then they would just sweep through the game that way, right? It was just so much value that every minion you played, they couldn't all be answered, right? Funnily enough, you can answer enough of them, though, which is part of the reason why it's only in tier 3. Some of these cards are also going to rotate out. I believe Lothamar is rotating out from Taunt Warrior. Black Rock and Roll. No, that has to be Festival, so that's not rotating out yet. But still, losing one of your duplicates, your stat duplicators, is so big. I don't think Quality Assurance is, firstly, I don't think you'd make Taunt Warrior. And secondly, I think Taunt Warrior is going to take a big hit anyway. So I think this card is going to be pretty stinky. Just something else I wanted to mention. I've mentioned a few times that we've seen a lot of tutor cards like Taunt and Rush, for example. One card I keep kind of forgetting about or just skipping over is Ziliax, because Ziliax can be whatever you want it to be. Obviously, if you make this super uber Ziliax and you've got your perfect module on it, and that's fine for what you want to use for Ziliax. Obviously, you can use Quality Assurance to tutor for that. But if you're going to do that, you would probably use Town Crier instead, right? Because this is Taunt and Rush, the perfect module. So just bear in mind, some of these cards might see play just to tutor for Ziliax, depending on how insane your Ziliax is. The other legendary revealed, Botface, 9 mana, 3/9 mech, Taunt. After this takes damage, get 2 random minis. I'm not going to lie, when I looked at this card at first, I was like, boy, this is terrible. I was super underwhelmed. To be honest with you, I was completely underwhelmed by the entire Warrior set. Not to be the fun police. But now that I've seen all of the cards together, and they've all revealed, and I've been theory crafting my head the deck that would go together, I can actually see a world where there is a mech Warrior deck and it's going to be fairly strong. But I'm not sure Botface will make the cut. Obviously, if you're going to use your Botface in your deck, and this is clearly a big value generator, you're going to want some way to trigger the damage itself, and Warrior is good for this, right? The Enraged Warrior was an archetype, so you could easily put Sanguine Depths on the board, which, by the way, is also rotating into the core set, so they're still going to have access to this as Warrior. You can put the Sanguine Depths on the board on a previous turn. Then you can play your bot face, then you can Sanguine Depth your bot face, and then he's a 9 mana 3/8, actually 5/8, sorry, and he's giving you 2 random minis. That's pretty good value. You can Blade Storm with bot face on the board. Obviously, you would need a coin or something like that to achieve this. But if you were like trading out a 9, I mean, this is a stupid example, but if you're trading out, no, let's make it a more sensible example. Let's say you've emptied your entire hand and there's a 5 health minion on the board of your opponents. And you play bot face and Blade Storm and you just fill your hand with minis. And obviously you have the mana to spend for the mini because they cost 1. That's a pretty big swing turn. You could also ping it 1 time and Crimson Expanse it to get even more bot face value. And also, bear in mind it's 9 mana, so you could conceivably play a Drone Deconstructor to get a Magnetic Spark, but which would also give it an additional health point, which might give you another mini, but also could give you a more powerful effect like giving bot face Rush, so that it could generate a mini and deal some damage, or something like Reborn as well, just to give you an additional mini on top of the minis you're already getting. Now, obviously, and this is kind of where my issue with bot face comes, I'd say 12 mana stat line, 12 stat line on the attack and defense. You're probably looking at around like a 5-ish mana card with Taunt as well. That type of dealio. So is the effect of after this takes damage, get 2 random minis worth it? 2 minis are worth 1 mana, right? According to the game. Not all minis are made equal, as we're about to see. So you're kind of assuming bot face is going to take damage 2 times at the very least to break even, 3 to get more. And honestly, I don't know if you're going to have the hand space for this. If you're playing some sort of value warrior deck, you're just not going to be able to hold all these minis, right? And it's a really unfortunate situation that bot face, like, it would be better for bot face to have, you know, 1 less mana and like 2 less health. Hell, it would even be better for him to lose probably 2 mana and like lose your respective stats from both attack and health, just so that you could play more minis on his turn, so you just wouldn't, you know, fully fill your hand up and just never be able to play everything. It's just going to feel really clunky and slow, I think. Obviously, as well, bot face is going to, his quality is going to depend on the minis in the set. One of them is a spoiler for the warrior one, you may have noticed. Obviously, we haven't seen all the minis, so bot face may rise or fall depending on over the course of the reveals for the classes. That being said, I do expect the class minis to typically be better. Of the 10 we've seen so far, I think 3 of them are very good for what will be this mech warrior deck, or at least what I'm envisaging. Factory Assembly Bot is going to be one of them. And again, just as a reminder, you get the mini, not the full form. So just imagine in your brain, close your eyes, imagine these are all 1/1/1s, okay? So obviously Factory Assembly Bot would be huge. If you're running some sort of value, you're probably going to be a bit more control orientated, in which case Toy Captain Tarim is going to be very good for you. Now I think there's going to be some Death Rattle mechs in this deck, and Boom Wrench, which we'll talk about in a moment, gives you more value on the Death Rattle mech side of things. And because it'll be the 1 mana 1/1 weapon, it's pretty easy to trigger it, so you get a free Death Rattle off that. Pretty good value. The other 7, however, are pretty mediocre, right? Tigress Plushie is a 1 mana 1/1 Rush Lifesteal Divine Shield minion. Cool. Amateur Puppeteer, are you going to be running any undeads in your mech deck? Probably not. That's what I'm going to guess. Sweet and Snow Flurry, you're going to get 2 random temporary frost spells. Who knows? Again, you're not going to be playing it on that turn at least, so it's going to be a more slow value gain. Chaya Drake, Warrior typically doesn't like to get spell damage. Actually, some of the cards we're about to see would be negatively affected by giving spell damage. Drawing a spell, though, 1 mana draw a card. Sure, it's not the worst thing. Deal 4 damage with a condition on it. 1 mana 1/1 Rush, potentially draw a card if you do exact lethal damage. Or, well, let's just say it's a 1 mana 3/3 after you do the spell burst. It's just... I don't think it's going to be good enough. But maybe Botface will just sneak in. Maybe the deck does need a slight value add, and Botface will make it in part because he's a taunt minion, and mainly in part because he's a mech minion. Now we go to other mechs, and you may notice more Death Rattle, more Taunt. 6 mana 4/8 mech, Testing Dummy. Death Rattle, deal 8 damage randomly split amongst all enemies. Alright, big number dealing damage randomly split always makes you think of Mask of Cthulhu, right? From the past, that was 7 mana deal 10 damage randomly split amongst all enemies. For 1 less mana and 2 less damage, you get a 4/8 taunt minion on top of it. Very good! That's very good, right? But it's not quite that. It's not quite the same though, is it? Mask of Cthulhu, you get the damage instantly, right? You play the card when it's best to play the card. I know that sounds stupid, but you can see your opponent's board state at the moment you play Mask of Cthulhu. Testing Dummy, on the other hand, can be played around because it's on a Death Rattle, so unless you're triggering the Death Rattle yourself, remember the weapon that we had a sneak preview of? Yeah, but unless you're triggering the Death Rattle yourself, you don't really get to control your opponent's board state, so they could play around this. So I think Testing Dummy on its own in a vacuum isn't a great card, but I think it will see play in this mech warrior deck because of the sum of its parts, which are the other cards we're about to go through. Wreck 'em and Deck 'em. What a great name. 3 mana warrior spell. Choose a friendly mech. Summon a copy of it that attacks a random enemy, and then it dies. Obviously, this was designed for like stuff like Testing Dummy in mind. You play your 6 mana 4/8 mech. You play the 3 mana spell, so you're going to need 9 mana for this entire combo. One of the 6/4/8 mechs goes off and does 4 damage on a random enemy, and this might be the face. And then it just dies. And after it dies, it deals another 8 damage. But conceivably, you could do 12 damage to minions on board. Obviously, some of these will probably go to the face, but there is a world that happens. For 9 mana, that's pretty decent. That is like, you know, Astalor tier 3 levels of quality. Now, it is a 2-card combo. And at the end of it, you have this 6 mana 4/8 taunt Death Rattle mech, which might be better than just, you know, level 3 Astalor was. Honestly, I can see this being a thing. Another card I can see Wreck 'em and Deck 'em working with was also the pre-revealed Fireworker, right? 5 mana mech has a Death Rattle as well, which is perfect for when the minion dies at the end of things. It gets a copy of it for 8 mana, you know, the Wreck 'em Deck 'em plus Fireworker combo. The other Fireworker does 5 damage. Either it'll die in the process, or it will die at the end. Generate 2 1/1 boom bots, which have Death Rattle deal 1 to 4 damage. And that's even more damage, right? And then you've got your Fireworker on the field. It's just, as much as I say, you know, your opponent can play around these, deal damage randomly split amongst all enemies. There becomes a critical mass where they can't anymore. And this deck, as we're like slowly unwinding it, it's going to be tough to deal with these large amounts of split damage. 8 from a Testing Dummy, you know, potentially 8 from the boom bots. That's a lot of damage, right? Anyway, we had a sneak peek of this before. Warrior has got a new weapon. It's called Boom Wrench. 4 mana 3/2 weapon, miniaturized. So once you play it, you get a 1 mana 1/1 copy of it. Death Rattle. Trigger the Death Rattle of a random friendly mech. Obviously, very good with Testing Dummy. Obviously, very good with Fireworker. In fact, they're the only Death Rattle mechs in Warrior, and they will be the only ones because we've now seen all the neutrals and we've seen all of the... Actually, now I think about it, I might have missed one off. It's not in Warrior, though. It's all the neutrals and all the Warrior cards we've seen. So these are the Warrior ones we're going to get. These are the neutral ones we're going to get. I have missed one off. Ziliax, again, can be a Death Rattle, so just bear in mind Ziliax could be a thing. But yeah, Containment Unit as well, which is a pretty good target for this. You play your 7 mana 6/6, have the Boom Wrench set for being destroyed on that turn. And it only has 2 attacks, so you know, you play Boom Wrench, you attack, and on the next turn you play your big Death Rattle minion. You attack with Boom Wrench, and big Death Rattle goes off. That's pretty good value, right? That is basically cheating out 8 mana. Other choices, and I don't think we'll see these in the deck, but Mecha Leaper is another choice, and so is Replicating Menace. Maybe there is some sort of aggro version of this. I think the version I'm envisaging is more mid-range based, but maybe does have this like aggressive forefront, and then you go into these big mechs that if your opponent kills them, they're just going to suffer every single time. Other things I'm not entirely certain on, I don't quite know how this interaction is going to work. If you magnetize Containment Unit onto a Death Rattle mech, will you get both the Death Rattle from Boom Wrench, or does it treat the magnetic minion separately from the non-magnetic one? Because if you do get both, That's insane value, truly insane value. And what's really nice is the 1 mana 1/1 weapon as well. That can be easily weaved into one of these turns where you play one of these mechs and just instantly trigger it. So yeah, I can see this being a very strong weapon, and it'll definitely make its way into Mech Warrior. I think this is the final card or the final piece of the puzzle for this deck. And when I saw this at first, I was like, okay, this card is kind of garbage, but upon reflection, I can see a world where this card is not kind of garbage. 5 mana Chemical Spill. Summon the highest cost minion from your hand and deal 5 damage to it. Okay, so for 5 mana, you can cheat out a 10 cost minion, but you're going to do 5 damage to it. That's effectively lowering, its health stat line by 5, and I can kind of see that being, roughly 2 mana. Obviously, mana, works slightly differently, and stats work differently as you get to these big minions. You want more stats for your buck at that point, because most giant minions have insane effects. But yeah, you're potentially cheating out 3 mana-ish on the Chemical Spell. Obviously, some minions are not very good for this if they just die in the process and they haven't got a Death Rattle. That's not good. If they're a Battle Cry minion, also not very good. There are, though, a few Aura minions that I think this will work very, very, very well on. And the first one you may have gathered by my introduction is Grommash. Cheat out Grommash on turn 5. You deal 5 damage to it. It gains 6 attack because that's Grommash's thing. And on turn 5, you have a minion doing 10 damage to you. Yikes, that is really scary. It will only have 4 health, so it should be fairly easy to deal with, but this could definitely be a finisher, your Chemical Spill into Grommash combo. Factory Assembly Bot, I think this is the most obvious one, right? It's a big 10 mana minion. You Chemical Spill on turn 5, the Assembly Bot comes out as a 6/2. It summons a 6/7 bot that attacks a random enemy. That's still, in total, 12/9 of stats for 5 mana. That is disgusting. And 6 of it will go quickly. That is really, really disgusting. Now, I assume you don't get the Miniaturize effect. I believe you have to play the card to get it. So you miss out on the 1/1 version, but that's pretty strong, right? Just cheating it out on turn 5. The other one that I thought I think this is more of a blast to the past, is Ysera. If you get out a cheated Ysera, which would be a 4/7, that's still pretty hard to kill around turn 5, and you can start accumulating some dream cards, which are better than average draws. You may be also saying that clearly this is meant for testing dummy and bot face. I think there is a world that if Chemical Spill makes this Mech Warrior deck, and this is one of the cards I'm not 100% certain on, I think it might do, but it's going to be close. If this makes the deck, then there's an argument to be made to put Grommash in the deck. And when you put Grommash into the deck, there's an argument to be made to put in some sort of enrage mechanics into your Mech Warrior deck. And at which point you might just slot Botface in there as a 25th or 30th card. So I think that's where Botface will come into this argument. I think on the basis, though, 5 mana, you cheat out Botface, right? So you get a 5 mana 3/4 effectively, give you 2 random minis which are worth 1 mana. That's not the greatest deal of all times. Similarly, the testing dummy, you're getting what is effectively a 5 mana 4/3, right? With Taunt. With a pretty good Death Rattle on it. I feel like that is just too fair, honestly, so. But yeah, Chemical Spill into Grommash, into Factory Assembly Bot. I think that is where the good stuff will lie. Again, you could Ziliax, you could put the perfect module on your Ziliax so that the Divine Shield eats the Chemical Spill, and then you can put on the big mana cost ones like the perfect module plus the virus module to make this super Ziliax. Do I think that's going to ever be a good thing? Probably not. I do think Ziliax will get into this mech deck as well, but I think this is just such a niche situation that I think you just won't want your Ziliax to be pulled out by Chemical Spill. And in fact, I think you'll be running a cheaper version of this so that it almost never gets pulled. Just as a side note, one really funny card that I kind of wish Uzamat was still in the core set, but it's unfortunately rotating out. I love the Chemical Spill on Uzamat, so they just instantly dies and does it summons 5 tentacles, which then just destroy 5 of your opponent minions, and you basically spend 5 mana for 5/15? Destroy 5 minions. That could have been really interesting, and Uzamat didn't see a lot of play, but sadly the stars didn't align for it. Anyway, so this is the package that I think you're going to see for Mech Warrior. And I think this is the direction Warrior is going for at least the beginning of the expansion. And maybe be continued onwards, because we're seeing a lot of Death Rattle cards in Warrior. So I wouldn't be surprised if they further support Death Rattle Warrior. I think it's going to be Wreck 'em and Deck 'em. I think Testing Dummy will make it. I think Factory Assembly Bot will definitely make it. Boom Wrench, Firework, and obviously Inventor Boom. They will all definitely make it. I think Chemical Spill will sneak into there for the high roll that you can chemically spill a Factory Assembly Bot. I think then you will put Bot Face and Grommash in the deck to give you a little bit of leeway, so you have other things that you could conceivably chemical spill out, and then not be the absolute worst thing. If it turns out that Chemical Spill into Factory Assembly Bot isn't a good enough cheat, then the 3 cards on the right none of them will make it, I think. Because at the end of the day, Inventor Boom, one of the things you want to resurrect, the things that do damage, right? Especially things that do damage after they die. They attack random enemies, they die, they do more damage. It's more and more pressure. So I think for Inventor Boom, you want to be getting out these Fireworkers, the Testing Dummies, and the Factory Assembly Bots. I don't think you really want Bot Face. To round out Warrior, we have some chaff. 2-mana spell, Safety Goggles. Gain 6 armor, cost 0 if you don't have any armor. Awful. This will see 0 play. Why? The only deck that would probably... Well, I say this. One of the only decks that really wants to gain armor is Odin Warrior. They typically want to build up armor early anyway, so they don't get killed by aggro, so they're always trying to get armor by pushing the button, basically. And other things that, like, the Razor... What's it called? The Quillbore? The Rockstar Razor Boy. I can't remember his name. But you want to be slowly gaining armor. Obviously, you don't want to be using, like, your shield blocks and stuff like that, because you want to use it after Odin. But basically, by the time that Odin is played on the board, I think you're going to, typically as a warrior deck, have like 15 or 20 armor. At which point you're playing 2 mana for 6 armor. Shield block is still going to be in core, I believe. That is 2 mana, you gain 1 less armor, but you draw a card on top of it. Shield block it just is better. It's more consistent. You lose 1 armor, but you get a draw, and that is good enough. The final card for Warrior, Lab Patron. 4 mana 3/3. The first time you gain armor each turn, summon another Lab Patron. Alright. Obviously, this is a nod back to Grim Patron, which was every time this minion survived damage, you'd summon another Grim Patron. This often saw play in Warrior, because Warrior had Enrage mechanic cards. So you would ping one of your Grim Patrons, everyone would get in here, you'd get a 3/3 Grim Patron, right? And you'd have a 3/2. Then you might do, you know, like a Whirlwind, and it would trigger both Grim Patrons and that type of thing. And the only way to then kill this off was to get all the patrons at like the same health line, or you needed hard destruction. And if you got them all at the same health line and you did a big AoE damage of that amount, the patrons would all explode together. Lab Patron, on the other hand, is not as good as Grim Patron. If you didn't have the text the first time, it would be really, really good. Unfortunately, the first time means that you are going to be only getting 1 use of Lab Patron per turn. Obviously, if you get 2 on the board, then it's 2 times 2 instead, so you get 4 triggers. This thing is not going to be living on the board for too long, though. I can guarantee you that. And I was also having a look into it and what Warrior can do for armor gain and what is the cheapest armor gain. Obviously, Safety Goggles. Is it worth it to play Lab Patron on 4, Safety Goggles with no armor, presumably, to get another Lab Patron? That is a 4 mana 6/6. It's pretty good, right? Don't get me wrong. But you are running a bad card in Safety Goggles for it. The more reasonable expectation, I think, and maybe this does end up making Odin Warrior just, if you put the Rifts in the deck, then conceivably you can play Lab Patron into a Rift. The first Rift will give you armor, and then, you know, you'll get another Lab Patron for 5. So for 5 mana, you get 6/6, and it's 2 minions your opponent will have to deal with. So that's not the worst thing. And then any further Rift from that, as long as you finale, it might give you another first Rift, which will give you armor, which will give you patrons, that type of thing. What I think is more realistic, though, is that you'll want to Lab Patron with another armor generator, like a Needle Rock Totem, a Bash, your Button. And a lot of these things at the breakpoint for Warrior are 2 mana to gain armor. And then if you boil down the equation, so that is the most common situation. The most common situation for that patron will be you spend 6 mana to get 6/6 of stats, which is not good enough. So I don't think that patron will quite make it into any deck. If it does, it'll be Odin Warrior, and it'll be because of the verse rifts. But I think there's just better things you can play around for Odin Warrior. Anyway, that is all of the Warrior cards. I'm really excited to see how this Death Rattle Mech Warrior deck is going to be formulated. And definitely later on, I'm going to be trying to put that together, so wish me luck. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll be here for more reveals tomorrow. Goodbye.